All right, we're back. So let's continue our introduction to the drug culture. They actually call it the counterculture. And as you can see here, and let's see, my mouse should be working now. This is the United States. Here we are in Arizona, California, New Mexico, Texas, right? So we border Mexico. And like I mentioned before, because we're a border state to Mexico, and Mexico is a courier of a lot of the drugs that come in from South America into the U.S. We have a large influence of drug cartels, drug trafficking, drug stash houses. As a matter of fact, we've kind of been known as the stash house for America. And it's not to say that the Mexican people are bad or anybody from Mexico is bad, but if you look at the facts that Mexico has a contract with South America to smuggle drugs into our country, and we're going to look at that shortly. You have Mexican drug cartels that are criminal organizations that are obviously smuggling the drugs into the United States, and then actually have like a network all across the United States to distribute drugs. So let's go into the next slide here. I might have to mute myself here in a second. All right, so I muted myself, and you probably heard those sounds come through from the outside. Those are just some cheesy sound effects I've had in there for a while. But being this class is based in Arizona and with Phoenix College, this is Arizona's major transshipment point for drugs coming into the U.S., like I mentioned. Some studies, at least studies over the past few years, show that about 80% of the drugs coming into our country do pass through Arizona. The reason for that is our porous border. The U.S. shares about a 2,000-mile border with Mexico in the southwestern United States. And because of the ruggedness of the Arizona border with Mexico, it's really hard to secure that border, at least physically. I know there's a lot of talk about putting the wall up, whether you're for or against the wall. We have so much technology nowadays that with drones and with satellites and with sensors that whether there's a physical wall or not, there are ways to secure our border from some of the drugs coming in. Now, obviously, as you know, there's drugs in prison systems. There's drugs in hospital systems. There's drugs virtually all over society. So one would say, well, we could put up a wall, we could secure our border, we're still going to have drugs in our country. And that's true. Drugs are going to get here, whether they come in through the border or whether you decide to cook them up in your bathtub or a trailer or grow your own marijuana. The fact that drugs are going to be here. I can tell you that securing the border and making it more difficult to traffic drugs in would definitely be a step in the right direction. So we have the NAFTA treaty, that's the North American Free Trade Agreement, and there's been a lot of talk recently about changing this treaty. What NAFTA did do, though, is it kind of opened our borders up, primarily with like Mexico and Canada, but it opened our borders up for free trade. And whereas trucks were more limited before NAFTA, semi-trucks and produce trucks and commercial trucks, transportation overall, with NAFTA, it really opened it up. We definitely are struggling with law enforcement resources to combat the drug problem. The drug cartels and drug trafficking is $1 billion a year business. It's enormous. And, you know, we put money towards drug enforcement through our taxes. But it's really tough to compete with a cartel that their sole purpose is to get drugs into our country. They're going to do whatever they can to get the drugs into our country, and they definitely have a lot of resources to do it. Arizona is also a support base for traffickers. A lot of the drugs that come up through the border are stored in Arizona before they're shipped out to other parts of the country. I personally investigated a few stash houses. I'll be showing you photographs of some of the stash houses. One of the largest ones I investigated. It was a metric ton of marijuana in a condominium location in South Phoenix. Also in Arizona, we have an interstate highway system, and we have an international airport. So because of the international highway system, you have like the I-17 freeway that goes north. You have the I-40 freeway up in northern Arizona that can go east and west. You have the I-10 that can go east and west. So we definitely have international or interstate routes to traffic drugs out of our state. We also have an international airport, which means people can come from other parts of the world through the Phoenix International Airport. And in case you didn't know, there are actually drugs that are smuggled through the airport. Post 9/11, a lot of that has become more difficult just because of the scrutiny with the TSA searching people. So it's more limited than it was before. Also, there's a lot of money that comes through the airport with drug couriers. So I have worked some airport interdiction, worked right down at the airport, and a lot of that was generated, a lot of the work down there was generated by tips that supposed or alleged drug traffickers were coming into town, and then we'd often locate them at the airport and do some surveillance on them. All right, so let's move on. And I can bring myself back up here if you'd care to see me. So let's talk about smuggling briefly. About every year, you hear about a tunnel being discovered at our south border with Mexico. And they're notorious. And there probably are tunnels in operation right now. There's a lot of money, like I said, in drug trafficking. So the main problem is getting it into our country. So if you have a tunnel that goes from one building to another building, one in the U.S. and one in Mexico, then you can literally run that tunnel 24/7 and run people through that tunnel, run drugs through the tunnel. And you'll hear in the news every year that they discover tunnels. And if they haven't discovered them, they're still in operation. It's just an ongoing battle of discovering new tunnels and closing them down. There's a fast boat. Fast boats have been used over in Florida with drugs coming up from South America, like Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru through the Caribbean islands. A lot of times they go into the Caribbean islands where then they're staged and then they run them up into Florida. So Florida still has some drug trafficking going on. It's just not like it was in the 1980s when Don Johnson and Miami Vice was, at its peak in the 1980s. And then down here we have the Rio Grande River that is down in Texas. And there's a lot of traffic that comes through there. So I'm going to show you a video on a tunnel that's been discovered. So if you give me a second here, I'll be right back.